Chapter 4. Life in the Lone Star State. After my discharge, I went to board in town, and with good quarters, fine air, and excellent food, I gained fast. A gambler named Jim Scott roomed with me, and very kindly volunteered to teach me all the tricks of the trade. The mysteries of faro, monte, and poker, games of short cards and waxed cards, became clear to me by his skillful instruction, and I provided a promising pupil. One evening, I, with Scotty, sauntered into the Bexar Exchange, a noted drinking and gambling saloon. The barroom was crowded with volunteers, regulars, Texas Rangers, a few Delaware Indians, and Mexicans. The Rangers were the scouts of our army, and a more reckless devil-may-care looking set it would be impossible to find this side of the infernal regions. Some wore buckskin shirts, black with grease and blood. Some wore red shirts, their trousers thrust into their high boots. All were armed with revolvers and huge bowie knives. Take them all together, with their uncouth costumes, bearded faces, lean and brawny forms, fierce wild eyes, and swaggering manners, they were fit representatives of the outlaws which made up the population of the Lone Star State. Scotty joined in a four-handed game of poker, and I sauntered from table to table, watching with interest. Oaths and cigar smoke filled the air. Knives were drawn, but no blood was spilt, as friends would interfere before the disputants came to blows. At one small table sat two men playing euchre for the drinks. One, who was quietly playing his hand in a mild, timid way, utterly at variance with his hardened, desperate appearance, was short and thick-set. His face bronzed by exposure to the hue of an Indian, with eyes deeply sunken and bloodshot, and coarse black hair hanging in snake-like locks down his back. His costume was that of a Mexican herdman, made of leather, with a Mexican blanket thrown over his shoulder. His opponent was a tall, reckless, good-looking young ranger, dressed in a red shirt and buckskin leggings. A dispute arose. The short ruffian threw a glass of liquor in the tall one's face, who sprang to his feet, drew his revolver, and placing the muzzle against the breast of the thrower, swore with fearful oaths that if he did not apologize, he would blow a hole through him a rabbit could jump through. The threatened man did not move from his seat, but replied, "Shoot and be damned, but if you miss, John Glanton won't miss you." When he mentioned his name, a look of fear passed over the ranger's face. He pulled the trigger, but only the cap exploded. Quick as a flash, Glanton sprang up, a huge bowie knife flashed in the candlelight, and the tall, powerful young ranger fell with a sickening thud to the floor, a corpse. His neck cut half through. Glanton jumped over the table and, placing one foot on his victim, said, "Strangers, do you wish to take up this fight? If so, step out. If not, we'll drink." As no one seemed disposed to accept the challenge, all hands went with him to the bar and touched glasses with him. The warm body was carried out. Sawdust was sprinkled over the blood-stained floor. Glanton carefully wiped his knife on the leather sleeve of his jacket, and matters in the Bexar Exchange resumed their usual course. I inquired about Glanton, for whom somehow I felt a sort of admiration, in spite of my horror at his bloody deed, and learned he was a famous Indian fighter and desperado of the frontier, the hero of many bloody personal encounters with the outlaws of the border. I thought, in a society so dangerous, I should go armed, and purchase myself a bowie knife with a 9-inch blade warranted to cut through bone without turning the edge. A few days later, I had trouble with Scotty about the division of some money we had won at a 3-handed game of poker with a commissary clerk in which, to keep up appearances, I lost all my money to Scotty, along with the clerk. When I asked for a settlement, Scotty denied all partnership and swore he had won not only the clerk's, but my money in a fair game, and this when I had rung in the cold deck that fleeced us both. There was only one way in Texas in '46 to settle misunderstandings of this nature. We went for each other. And he, very foolishly, run on to the point of my Arkansas toothpick, and was badly cut for his want of judgment. I was seized by the guard, old Spanish irons were placed on me, and I was thrust into the calaboose. A room about 20 feet square, inhabited by a very select society of Indians, Texans, horse thieves, murderers, and the vilest characters of the lawless frontier. The horrors of the old Spanish jail in San Antonio were more terrible than any scene in the Inferno of Dante. How long I remained here I never knew. It seemed years. though it could have been but a few days. I was covered in vermin. The heavy rusty irons wore the flesh of my ankles, in which the lice burrowed. My jacket was stolen, and my shirt I tore into strips to bind around the irons to keep them from chafing. The place was outrageously filthy, the air hot and pestiferous, food scant and poor, with water unfit even for washing. The awful blasphemy of the wretches incarcerated with me, their horrid bestial orgies too revolting for belief, drove me in my weak state insane. Fortunately for me, Scotty recovered and declined to appear against me, so I was turned loose with nothing on but my pants, and wild with my sufferings, I can faintly remember flying, I thought pursued by demons, and then came darkness and oblivion. From this, I awoke with a most delicious sense of comfort and freedom from pain. I was in a nice, soft, clean bed, and an old lady was sitting close by, knitting beside an open window, through which came a sweet, fresh breeze. Hearing me stir, she left the room crying out, "Carl! Carl!" and a young man entered the room. He congratulated me on the recovery of my reason and informed me that I was in his house in Castroville, 30 miles from San Antonio, that I had been found by a farmer 3 weeks before, lying near the road entirely nude and insensible. My host was a Dr. Carl Ritter by name, a member of the German settlement at Castroville. Dr. Ritter had altered to fit me a suit of his clothes, made of fine German broadcloth, and they well became me. This family placed me under the greatest obligations by their extreme kindness. Catherine Ritter, the doctor's sister, was not over 16, innocent and confiding, and I soon knew that she had given me unsolicited her first pure love. She seemed to consider she had an exclusive right to me, that in fact I was her property. I was afraid to hurt her feelings, yet honor forbid my returning her constant care. One night after the family was all in bed, I was awakened by having sweet, soft lips pressed to mine and found Miss Ritter by my side, her arms around me. She was in her night dress, and as the night was very warm, I was lying on the outside of the bed. She cried and whispered to me in German language the most loving entreaties. Her kisses and thrilling embraces aroused all my amorous passions, and unconsciously this unsophisticated girl became almost delirious with hitherto unknown desires. What a trial for one's principles of honor! The temptation of Saint Anthony was not a circumstance to mine. Nature guided her in her innocence to seek relief to her distressed condition, and I not only had my own passions to fight, but the most provoking manipulations from this charming girl who knew no wrong in following the teachings of Dame Nature. But I resisted and triumphed, and the honor of the house of Ritter suffered not at my hands. Poor Catherine at daylight left my room weak and exhausted, and though still a virgin, yet no longer innocent in mind, and more in love than ever. I started early next morning for San Antonio, where I reported to regular Army headquarters and enlisted for the war in Company E, 1st U.S. Dragoons, Captain Enoch Steen commanding. General Wool's division consisted of the 1st and 2nd Illinois Volunteers under Colonel J.J. Hardin and Colonel William H. Bissell, Major Bonneville's battalion of the 6th U.S. Infantry, the Arkansas Cavalry under Colonel Yell, Captain Washington's battery of light artillery, and Colonel William S. Harney's Dragoons, in which I served, and a spy company of Texas Rangers, the whole numbering about 3,000 men and officers. The Dragoons encamped near the mission of Concepcion. We were officered as follows: Commanding Officer E, Captain Enoch Steen, 1st Lieutenant Daniel H. Rucker, 2nd Lieutenant Abraham Buford, Commanding Officer A, Captain William Eustace, with Lieutenants Carleton, Whittlesey, and Kontz. I was now placed under a drill sergeant and was put through in the School of the Soldier, in the riding school, and in carbine and saber exercises. I recovered my health and strength very rapidly and gained a love for the life of a dragoon. One day, Colonel Harney ordered the old mission to be cleaned out, intending to use it to store forage for his command. A large detail of dragoons, well provided with shovels and brooms, commenced to clean out the nave of the church. The floor was covered to the depth of 2 foot with the excrement of bats. While some of the detail were at work, others provided themselves with torches to explore the subterranean vaults and passages under the building, and said to connect with the fortress of the Alamo. Behind, where the altar formerly stood, a flight of stone steps descended into the dark and gloomy place. It was one mass of bats. They hung on the walls and arched roof in clusters like bees when swarming. The floor was covered and yielded under the step like a bog. Out of sport, some of the dragoons fired their pistols into the living, squirming mass. When, like a tornado, the bats flew out of the passage, extinguishing the torches, but fortunately carrying the men out of the vault with them. The party in the church rushed for the door in the wildest alarm, and though some were knocked down and badly frightened, all got outside in safety. The little winged animals poured out of the great door for 2 hours, making their way to the mission of San Jose, 6 miles below, their column being so dense as to resemble a suspension bridge. Thousands lay in the church and on the ground dead and dying from the crush. The stench in the mission prevented its being used. One evening, there was to be a Mexican fandango at San Jose. Several of us obtained a pass until Rouvet from our company commander, and I took it to Major Benjamin L. Beale, 2nd Dragoons officer of the day, to be countersigned. He was a short, red-faced and nosed man, and looked the major all over. It was evident that nature intended him for that position, and nothing else. He was known in the army as Old Brilliant, and from his unusual brilliant appearance at this time, I judged that the influence of Old Rye had something to do with it. The jolly major signed the pass and remarked, "Report to me at the guard tent at Tattoo." Accordingly, at the time, half a dozen of Uncle Sam's bold dragoons drew up in line in front of the guard quarters, when the major soon joined us with the 2nd Dragoon band. Old Brilliant was a little more so, and carried with him a No. 1 Camp Kelly for a drum. We started down the bank of the San Antonio, a jolly party enough. The major went down several times before we reached the ford, but he still held on to the camp kettle. The water was a good 3 feet deep at the ford and running like a mill race. We stripped, but the fat major would wade through without undressing, got swept away, and it was with difficulty we saved him. But alas, the camp kettle was lost. The arrival at the ballroom of so distinguished a party rather surprised the greasers, but they soon recovered and we were cordially invited to participate in the festivity. The major dashed into a waltz with a dark-haired, white-robed senorita on whom he certainly produced an impression. I will long remember that night of wild fun and unsolicited debauchery. Wine and aguardiente, brandy, cheap and abundant, the women fine-shaped with black flashing eyes and very accommodating. For hours, the fandango was all fun and frolic. The major's voice could be heard, "Brilliant, by God, brilliant," until at daylight we started for Concepcion, all pretty well intoxicated with love and liquor. As we approached camp, we saw to our dismay Colonel Harney at the guard tents. We expected to be roughed, and were not disappointed. Those who knew Harney can appreciate the scene. To all that was said by Harney, our major had only one reply: "Brilliant fandango! Brilliant, by God! Brilliant girls, Colonel! Brilliant night!" Harney placed him under arrest, and we were confined to quarters for 24 hours.